right, what's going on, folks? What's up? It's another episode of Film Streak. My name is Rob. We're doing new films, and it's October. It's horror movie season, and I figured, you know what? I need to go back and I need to look at some films that I had on my list for a little bit, and then I kind of put them aside. You know, I did an episode. Let's see, when was this? I know it's something. Okay, yeah, I did it 2 years ago. I did an episode on a series of films in the Giallo genre, right? Italian horror films from the 70s and 80s and that period. And they're not necessarily horror films, I think, like we understand these days, but they're more like mystery slash thrillers slash just weird films. And they usually involve like serial killers. And sometimes it kind of, I will say this much. The genre probably set up some tropes and some cliches that haven't aged so well, but there's still something to those films of that period, whether it's the style of them or the sort of absurdist, sort of strange nature of them, because they weren't entirely like realistic. And although some of them did really push some boundaries, and even I think most of them didn't always have like supernatural elements, but some did. And so I start this with a documentary that I just saw. It's pretty new. It's from 2024. It's called Dario Argento, Panico. And it is about Dario Argento, the filmmaker from that period, the one who really kind of pioneered that genre and that style of filmmaking. And not only was a big part of that wave, but also kind of took it to a new level. You know, there were other filmmakers of the time that were doing similar things, maybe a little bit of a different lane, but his films seemed to kind of cross over, seemed to go beyond let's say the Italian film scene or even the horror genre. So this was an interesting look at his career, because the main thing is it starts with him in a secluded place. I think it's like a hotel or like a villa or something. And he's there to write what he says is his last film. And part of it is just looking at that experience. Like, this is his process. This is where he finds himself in, I guess, the creative state to be able to put a story together or to just focus and think and work. And so that's kind of our way into the situation. But as we're talking to him, we're seeing interviews with him. We also start to see interviews with other people that are in his life, whether it's collaborators like other filmmakers, musicians, other artists, the people that were part of his crew in the past, even his daughters, his sister. So there's a big part of this documentary that is not only about like what he's doing and how he works, but also a look back at a lot of the films and a lot of the sort of conventions that he established, the sort of cinematic language that he helped to build in that period. And so I think the value here is, if you're not familiar with the genre of the Giallo films, that's one thing. This is probably a good place to kind of understand some of the context of it. You know, there was a documentary I talked about in that last episode 2 years ago, which you can find on filmstrick.com, of course. If you go there, you can look for, I think it's called There's Always Room for Giallo or something like that. That's part of why I wanted to see this, because it kind of walks us through some of his films, right? And not only his personal perspective on the stories or the process of making the films, but a little bit of behind the scenes knowledge and insight on how those things affected him, whether they were successful, whether they were failures, or whether they were attempts at something new. So I thought, well, this is a really great place to start, because some of these films I have seen, some of them I have not. And so I used this as a little bit of a launching point to see some other films that I like I said, I had on my list for that episode 2 years ago, but because that I decided to look at other filmmakers and their work. But this, I said, no, let's do just Dario Argento. Let's look at some of his films and see how he progressed in this genre that he kind of helped create. So the first film I really want to talk about is the one that I think kind of broke him, like that really like made him a name, put him on the map. And that is The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. That's from 1970. And that is, looking back now, it's hard to see where it was pioneering or where it was really establishing things, because there's so many films over the last 50 plus years that have borrowed and cribbed a lot of what is in this, and films of this era, right? You've got the witness, the main character is a witness to a attempted murder. And so there's the sort of mystery element of it, of like trying to look for clues. This character is a writer. He's an American writer in Rome, and he happens to witness this struggle between a man and a woman. And it looks like the man was trying to kill the woman, but he didn't. And the man gets away. And so the police are involved. And this writer, Sam, he is sort of intrigued and kind of haunted of like, was he really able to do anything? And that sort of internal struggle of whether he was effective or not at helping or being of any kind of use in that situation. I think that's something that the film touches on it in little ways, but I think that's an important part of this, because we see this character kind of get obsessed with this whole thing to the point where he kind of goes his own way. Apart from the police investigation, he just starts looking for clues, and he starts trying to understand what is going on here, and trying to understand who this woman was, who the man was, like what was this situation that he just happened to see and walk in on, and is there anything else that can be done, and to the point where he starts to track down like who this killer was, because the man who got away, he couldn't really remember. He didn't have enough to go on to identify the man. And the woman herself, she's also a mystery. And so it's him kind of trying to piece this together, like from just outside of arm's reach, trying to stay objective, but also it's like stuck in his brain. I think there's enough of this film that it establishes, I think, a certain sort of format or structure for a main character trying to solve this mystery. And by the time we get to the end, when he starts to piece it all together and he thinks he has the answer and we think he has the answer, and then the rug gets pulled out from under us. And it's not entirely surprising if you were to watch it today. I got to say, like, the way this film works out, like who the actual killer is, the real identity of the killer, I kind of saw it coming. And the thing I didn't see coming is who in that situation is responsible for it. So that was interesting. I think that's the idea with these films. It's not like this is the first film that had an attempted murder or a witness to a murder and that person trying to figure it out, right? It's been done before, but this film does a different thing because it twists some of your expectations and some of where it would normally go. And then it also adds a certain level of style and, an intensity to it. I mean, because that's the other thing is like this film involves a series of murders, and some of this is maybe not today so much, but for the day is pretty violent. It's pretty graphic. And I think that's the idea, is like, it's kind of setting the stage. Like nothing is really safe. No character here is out of bounds. And so that's a big part of this genre, is understanding like you can't go into this film assuming the main character is safe or anybody that you might identify or relate to or root for is going to be untouchable. And this film kind of works in that sandbox instead of the more traditional way where it's like your main character, oh, he's good or she's good. Nothing's going to happen to them really. And they might feign that, oh, they're in danger, but we know nothing's going to happen to them. In this film, and a lot of films in this genre and this era, that was not one of the rules. And so this film, I think, uses that to its advantage to kind of get you, right? To pull the wool over your eyes a little bit. Like I said, the final twist I saw coming, there was a twist in the middle, though, or a reveal, let's say, that I didn't expect. And so, I give this some points for being for a film that's over 50 years old, for being sort of a step up in this genre and really taking things to a new level. I give it credit for that. I think the visual language of it doesn't feel so far removed. It feels more relevant or somewhat contemporary than the films that you might have seen in the 80s or 90s. Like some of the films from those eras in different genres even, they feel more antiquated than this film does. So the next film I saw here was a film called Tenebrae. And this is jumping forward a little bit. This is in 1982, right? So we go from 1970 to 1982. And I saw this one because this one seemed a little more interesting to me based on what they talk about in the documentary, right? In the documentary, it's kind of a similar premise that this film Tenebrae is about a writer who is traveling to Rome, and he's got a book that he's promoting, that it's a big success, and he's there to capitalize and leverage everything that he's built with this title, this new book. And while he's there, there's I guess a series, or it starts with one murder at the beginning of the film. And these films are some sort of based on his novel. And it, of course, draws interest of the police and the investigation, because it's like, hey, are you somehow related to this? What is going on? How is someone killing people based on things in your book? And that combined with, you've just got different people and different things pulling him in different directions. You can kind of sense like he's getting kind of overwhelmed by it. And when his family's in danger, it becomes a thing where you start to see like, oh, wait a minute. I think everyone's a suspect here. Like there's no clear indication of who the killer is. And so the way the film kind of gets us to the finale is that Peter, he kind of has a little bit of like a self-realization, a self-discovery. And then all hell breaks loose, right? And I don't necessarily want to give the ending away, but it is an interesting sort of development in this sort of slasher, serial killer, horror genre. And I feel like this must have been done before, but this film does it in such an interesting way. And I think here's why this film really worked for me. I found this one stronger and more interesting because it's just got a lot more kind of visually going on. There's a lot more kind of bold camera work going on. There's a different type of musical tone that it's got. It's kind of working in this electronic sort of dance, disco feel with the score versus some of the other films from the 70s, which were a little more like prog rock or whatever, or even orchestra. This one like feels like it's in a different era now, which it is. It's in the 80s. And also there's something about this film. I want to talk about this for a second because I feel like this is an important part of this genre. And I didn't really talk about it in the last episode a couple years ago, but watching this film, there's something about the way not only Dario Argento, but a lot of filmmakers of this era, of this genre, a lot of ways that they depict women, and not necessarily the women are victims and all that, but I mean, because that is a thing I don't think has aged so well. But there's an interesting way that they depict women and film women that is both, it makes them appealing, but it also gives them a certain power. And yet there's just a mystery to it also. It's a very strange sensuality, but it's not that. It's not even like, it's not necessarily like erotic, but it is appealing. because these women aren't doing anything to be sexy necessarily, but there's something about the way they're filmed and the way they sort of deliver lines and move that it's unlike what you see in a lot of other films. I don't know how to explain it really. Am I like totally talking out of my ass now? I mean, it's one thing to say, well, look, you just got a lot of hot girls in this movie. It's more than that. This film, I think, does it more than any other film that I've seen from Dario Argento. And like I said, it's not overt. It's not graphic or anything, but it is a thing where you notice it more. A lot of beautiful women in the film, but they're not there just because they're beautiful. They're there because they possess a certain chemistry, a certain whatever. And it really works in this film. And so there's a part of this that it sort of elevates the film for me. I don't know. Tenebrae, I feel like it's got not only the premise of it, but also the way it kind of develops. And there's like a weird, sort of strange tone to it because it's modern, but it's also mysterious. And it's got this sort of underlying thing of like past trauma or dealing with, even if it's just, you just want to call it like straight up mental illness. There's an aspect to this film that I think still works, you know? So this one I feel like was pretty strong. I really enjoyed watching this, and it's one that I probably want to see again at some point. For me, it's like Deep Red is really great. Blood and Black Lace, I think, was really great. And this one really works for me. The next film I saw here is right around the same time. It's 1980. So it was a couple years before Tenebrae. It's called Inferno. And this is a film that is just strange. And I feel like it's that way on purpose. It is about, well, you know, honestly, the way the film starts, you have no idea what it's about. It almost seems like a dream. There's a young woman. She kind of gets lured into this, looking for, she hears voices or something. She goes into this building. She ends up like going into the basement and going underwater somehow, like below the basement. And there's cats involved and there's dead bodies. And then there are other people that kind of fall into this trap, let's say. They're kind of entranced or lured into this building. And for a good part of this film, at least about halfway through, I was like, wait, where's the bad guy? Where's the villain? Where's the killer? Because it doesn't even seem like that's part of the equation here. You've got a main character who is moving into this building and is kind of discovering this all and actually starts to lay it out a little bit for the audience, like what this is, who are these people, what happened to those people at the beginning of the film. I'm not really clear, and it doesn't really spell that out until much later. And honestly, it's not even to the very end of the film where you really are shown that there is a villain in this. And it's totally not someone you suspect. And so I think that's where the film tries to do some really interesting things. It's playing with some of the conventions that have been established in previous films, even including a lot of Dario Argento's films in the 70s, where we're going to upend some of that. And we're going to make this really strange and really off the wall and almost confusing on purpose. It's kind of like hostile in that way of like, it doesn't want you to understand what is going on purpose. And so if you're cool with that, if you're willing to be patient and kind of hang with it for a minute, yeah, I could see that, you know, being rewarding in the end. But it does take a little bit of like faith and like, okay, well, we're dealing with somebody who's made great films and knows this genre. And so we got to have a little trust that we're going to get there. We're going to get somewhere. But this is just very strange. It is kind of a dream / nightmare for a good part of the film until the dots start to connect. And I mean, I got to say, it's an interesting sort of experiment and attempt to do something different. And so I can appreciate on that level. I think ultimately, though, it just feels messy. Like it doesn't feel very focused. It doesn't feel strong in that way because it's just so tenuous of like, you just don't know from scene to scene, like, who am I watching? What exactly is happening? You're just seeing these people, these characters, and you're not really clear why. And until our main character starts to like understand, like, oh, this is the situation. Oh, maybe it has something to do with the building. It's not a person. Oh, what? So that's a big reveal. And that's a strange sort of zag for this genre. But then by the time we get to the very end and you understand why this is happening, I guess it kind of makes sense. But here is a film that does really go into the sort of supernatural elements, right? It's not a person just, rampaging. It's not a revenge thing. It's not a jealousy thing. It's something way different. And if you're not down with that, and for me, this sort of genre, I feel like that's a leap, maybe a little too far for me. I think it just kind of, I don't know, it kind of dilutes everything that is trying to be done in the film when you get to that final reveal of like what exactly is going on. So for me, I think at least from these films, and there are some others I want to get to, but I wanted to at least talk about these and talk about this documentary. Because the thing is, Dario Argento, he made a lot of his hits, and it's even shown in the documentary. A lot of his bigger successes were in the 70s, in the 80s, but he's always been making films. He's made films into the 90s, into the 2000s. His last film was in 2022, and supposedly in this documentary, he's writing one more film. So I'm curious, like, how far does this go and where does the quality kind of stack up? A lot of filmmakers, as they get later into their careers, or maybe they just get older, either they repeat themselves or they kind of run out of ideas, or they just, are cashing in or whatever. I'm curious to see what not only some of Dario Argento's later films look like, but also that last film. What is it? When are we going to see that? I talked about in an episode not too long ago, I talked about Brian De Palma, and you kind of see that trend of it's, I guess, diminishing returns in a way, which is unfortunate, but you can still see traces of the filmmaker in all of his films. It's just some of them, the overall quality isn't quite there. So maybe this is a good way to add some of his more recent films, Dario Argento, to add some of his more recent films to my list and see what those look like. And see how they kind of stack up to maybe more contemporary horror films or thrillers or whatever genre we want to put him in these days. But at least for now, I at least got to go back and catch up with some of these other films, and I think I found a new favorite, actually. Tenebrae, I just really am fascinated with. But anyway, that's a look at some of these films. These aren't quite like horror films in my book. They are graphic, they are violent, they are bloody, and they do involve murder and some kind of dark and disturbing subject matter when it comes to some of these characters and the things that they're dealing with. Yes, of course, that is true. But they're not necessarily involving monsters or demons or vampires or whatever. So to me, this is a little more grounded, and I feel like it's, honestly, in a way, I feel like it's a little more relatable. It's a little more scary because this is stuff that you could see in some weird way. You could see some of this stuff happening. So anyway, that's it for this episode. Just wanted to catch up and talk about a couple of these films for a little bit. And if you want to check out some other episodes or even find that episode from 2022, it was episode 22, actually, from 2022. There's Always Room for Giallo. That has several films in this genre, including a few from Dario Argento, that, I don't know, maybe they'd be a little more interest to you. Maybe it's some of the same things I'm talking about, but that was my introduction to it. I really hadn't heard of this genre, or I've heard of Dario Argento, but I didn't really understand like this was the kinds of films he made. So for me, it was an eye-opening thing, kind of exposed me to this new genre, and now I'm just going to kind of keep it rolling. The other thing is, right now, in October 2024 at least, Criterion Channel has a collection, a a programming slate of different films in this genre from other filmmakers too. So that's a good place to start too. I recommend that. There's also, is it Arrow Video? They have their own streaming service, and you can find some of these titles and a lot more, obviously. They really go all in on the Giallo genre. So that's a good place to look too if you're just interested in more of these films. But anyway, go to filmstreak.com. You can find other episodes. You can subscribe to this podcast if you're not already. And, if you even just want to sign up to get these by email, you don't do podcast things or whatever, that's cool. And I've got a list of all these films. We're up to 500 and who knows what now. But anyway, that's just a handy thing for you, So in the meantime, hey, Halloween's coming up. Get your costumes out and be safe out there. And of course, go watch something new.